and welcome to another episode of Brave Stories. My name's Lucy Hughes and I'm from Channel 4, and I'm joined today by Elspeth Spelzini, Kula and Caroline Moffat, who are all working mums at Starcom. And we're here today to talk to you about maternity leave and some of the really difficult challenges that women face in maternity leave and how they can be overcome, and then that transition back into the working place as well. It's called Brave Stories. I'm going to launch straight into the really brave part of this story and talk about postnatal depression, if that's all right with you. Caroline, I know you've experienced postnatal depression quite recently. You've just come back from maternity leave. Would you be able to share your story with us?
Yes, of course. So I had my son Oscar about 3 weeks before lockdown, and I did suffer quite a lot of anxiety over that period. It was kind of triggered by two main things. The first was he struggled to feed. It was a really difficult time, and I used to kind of dread feeding times or dread the night time because that's when I'd kind of feel alone. And I tried to speak to different experts, and some just said, carry on, he's fine, he's not dehydrated, but we couldn't carry on how we were. So then we spoke to another consultant, and she said she'd never seen that issue before with a baby, and that she was sorry but couldn't help. And this was all during lockdown when we didn't really have access to, kind of see other people. So we didn't know what to do. My husband found this book on the internet by this Australian midwife on feeding aversions, and we just thought we might as well give it a go because we just didn't know what else to do. So we got it, and there was a recommendation. It's quite regimented over 2 weeks in terms of what you had to do, but we tried it and miraculously it worked. So it was such a relief when he started feeding again, and it made such a difference to us. But it just went on for so long. It was very hard. And the second one was actually he struggled to sleep. So when he turned 3 months, he refused to sleep in his cot, and he'd only sleep on mine and my husband's chests. And this went on for months and months. It was so difficult because I barely saw my husband. We never had dinner together for months, and we just had to I just felt like I had to keep going. There wasn't any other choice, even though I was like completely sleep deprived. I couldn't think, I just didn't really know what was going on. So then when we kind of fixed the feeding problem, we got help from a sleep consultant. So she came over, she stayed the night. So I was with her in his room, and then it got to a point where she said that she hadn't seen a baby with these types of problems before either. And my heart kind of sunk. It was the second time we'd obviously heard this. So she said she'd have to speak to some other sleep consultants she knew to see if they could kind of, come up with a plan, which she did, and it worked, and it was the best thing ever. It really changed our lives. It changed Oscar's life as well, and then he's turned into a really happy, smiley little boy. And it also kind of getting through those first 6 months. It's the hardest thing I've ever had to do, but it's made me feel so much stronger, and that I can kind of tackle anything now because we kind of got through that period.
Just going back to that first bit where you talk about we were in lockdown and you had these two really huge problems to overcome with a newborn baby on top of all the usual anxieties that come with having a baby. How did that isolation feel? How did you get through that?
It was so hard, especially when you were only allowed out the house once a day. So it's like, when do we have that walk? Because he was crying an awful lot as well, because he obviously wasn't happy with things. And my husband was trying to work from home downstairs, and he could just hear this endless crying as well. So it was very difficult, and our parents are in the north of England, so they couldn't even, when the rules were relaxed, they couldn't even take him for an hour to give us a break. It was very difficult. But luckily I made some really good friends through NCT, so they were like my lifeline, even though it's just WhatsApp, no matter what time of the day. They were there. Some of them dropped off wine, and it was just like lovely to have them. But it definitely made it seem a lot harder because you had nowhere to go. You were kind of stuck in those four walls. And luckily towards the end we could see one of the experts, but again, that was only just allowed. So I was having a lot of like phone calls with people. So it just felt, yeah, you just felt kind of, you know, completely alone, and it was kind of up to us to fix a problem.
And did you feel able, did you have anyone to talk to about those problems, and did you feel able to talk about how you were feeling? Because there's a lot of pressure, isn't there, when you have a baby, to fall madly in love with it immediately and to be delighted and happy and okay, a bit tired. But actually that sleep deprivation, that sort of feelings of isolation straight after having a baby and that loneliness can be really quite traumatic. Were you able to talk to people about it? Were you able to find some comfort somewhere?
I was asked, you know, obviously whether we were okay and things, but I felt it was quite difficult to talk about because I'd cry. So I kind of kept it all, inside.
Yeah, it's really, it's something that is very, very hard to talk about, isn't it? Thank you for sharing that with us. I know that's really, really difficult. I know all three of you have had your own individual experiences, and I think we should also take a moment to just say we're all delighted that we're all mothers and we all love our children very much, and there are some really positive things about all of this, but it's important to talk about the reality of having a baby as well. Claire, I know you had some real challenges when you had your children. Would you share your story with us?
Yeah, I mean, so much of what Caroline says has resonated, and I think if you speak honestly to a lot of mothers, you tend to find that anxiety and that guilt that seems to come kind of hand in hand with parenthood is very familiar to lots of working parents, let alone working mums. I think for me, I've got two beautiful girls, and after both of them I struggled with postnatal depression. At the time I didn't even really know what to call it. And it certainly wasn't diagnosed in any kind of official capacity. It's only on reflection I can really kind of recognise it as that now. But for me, I guess the added challenge on top of having quite challenging, it was challenging for my girls. They both had silent reflux, which is a kind of intense heartburn, and they equally could not be put down. So I totally can kind of empathise with that, holding your baby in the dark on your own, feeling very isolated. Sadly, 2 years prior to welcoming my first child into the world, I lost my mum as well. So, and what I hadn't really prepared for, which kind of seems illogical now because that was a profound, very difficult time of my life, is how much that would throw me back into. It was very triggering basically for the grief, because the first person you want to comfort you and guide you through this monumental change in your life is your mum. And I didn't have her. I didn't have that, in a similar vein, I didn't have that support I felt from that person that was closest to me. So that was really challenging, but I also drew on NCT, I drew on people that I know that had been through similar experiences, and I guess the thing that got me through was, one, being incredibly real about what I was going through. So I had some really deep, quite desperate thoughts very early on that were very challenging even to admit to myself, and I just found surrounding myself with people that I could be really honest with about some of those feelings and thoughts, to just, you know, a problem shared, a problem solved, but also just airing them and going, it's kind of okay to have those feelings and it's quite normal. And that helped me to kind of move forwards and they get better, and all the cliches are true. But it was incredibly tough, and it was my first real understanding of depression and what a lot of people actually experience in life in different phases of their life. So yeah, very challenging, and I think all of us can probably relate, and many mums and working parents can relate to it.
I'd like to move on to sort of talking a bit about moving back into work and transitioning back into the workplace, because I think it's really important that you go on maternity leave excited, happy, you come back into the workplace a completely different person with a completely different lifestyle, and you probably don't appreciate that when you go and when you're preparing for that. So how did you all find that preparation and that transition back into the working place? Claire, if we start with you, we'll do it in chronological order of who went on maternity leave first. How did you find it?
Sure. So I've got an 8 and a 6-year-old, and going back to work was quite different after both, actually. So I found it easier, weirdly, going back after my first child than my second. I think I've seen how things have changed over time. So I would say my first coming back into work was perhaps not as supportive as it could have been and is now, and there's great initiatives that are in play now which I'm delighted about for future parents. Equally, I was fortunate enough to come back the first time around to, my boss was a working parent, so I think that understanding and that just support was inherently in them, and it made equally my maternity cover hadn't been that great, so I felt immediately like I was adding value and I'd been missed, which is a lovely feeling. You go through both times, you go through a little bit like, am I going to have anything to say apart from Peppa Pig? You kind of lose a lot of confidence, I would say, and I definitely lost a lot of confidence and feeling like the expectation, particularly when you're coming back into a business you've been in. If you're going to a new role, slightly different, but you're coming back into a business you've been in and you've been held in a certain esteem or regard, to then come back and be expected to hit the ground running or be on full throttle is quite daunting. So I had to go on my own journey with that, of trying to be kind to myself and realising it was going to take a little while for me to hit the same accelerated pace, if I ever got there, to how I was pre-children. And everything changes, like you said, your priorities completely overhaul overnight.
Elspeth, you said that actually being a mum has made you better at your job, and that having a job has made you a better mum. I'm imagining that takes quite a long time to get to that point, but how did you find the support and the build-up to going back into work, and what the reality of that was when you first went back?
Yeah, so firstly, I have a huge amount of respect for stay-at-home mums, but for me, it's not something that I could do full-time. The relentlessness, the monotony for me is not something that helps me thrive. So I love having this kind of double life. I feel like a superhero sometimes, that by the time I've done my working days, I'm desperate to switch off from my email and just spend some time with my girls. And after a weekend with my girls, I'm kind of equally delighted to pop them off to the childminder and focus on having, you know, some conversations that aren't interrupted, and some time to myself. So for me, that's the balance that works. And I think what I've learnt through having two, certainly coming back the second time, is that the more I respect that, the more other people will. So the more boundaried I am about my working and non-working days, and that, you know, that balance, the more it works. That I really, you know, I'm in quite a creative role, so I'm able, I think, to recharge over my long weekends, and able to really like focus and go deep at work in a way that I know I struggled to when I was full-time, for me. So yeah, I love that. To pick up on the second part then around the kind of the transition back in, something that I had with my second was a maternity coach. So it was a program that Starcom were trialling at the time, and it was such a game changer. I know game changer, it's a cliche, but it was amazing. It made me sit and think, how can I take control of this situation, rather than just flowing with it, you know, and feeling unhappy and out of control. What can I do? And so she really guided me through that. The
coaching that you received, does Starcom still do that, or are there any other initiatives that have come about?
It isn't something that they have an external company for, but having seen the value in it, I set up something to kind of mimic it. So when I returned, I set up the Becoming programme, which is a network of mums like these who are buddies, essentially. So we buddy people up. I like to pretend it's like Tinder. Well, I've never been on Tinder, so I don't really know. My mums write profiles. They're beautiful, really honest, vulnerable profiles. So it means that when I have a pregnant lady come into the programme, she's able to choose someone who perhaps shares her experience of miscarriage, of having an IVF pregnancy, of any of those kinds of challenges that she may be facing, or not, or she may choose someone completely different, and they kind of get a feel for each other. And literally, it's someone to just take you for coffee, to talk to be completely honest with. I think there are good processes in place, obviously with line managers and HR, but those are people with a very specific vested interest in you and your role at the company. And therefore, there's a barrier, I think, as to how much you might want to share, because ultimately, this is someone who also decides whether you're going to get a promotion or a pay rise, and that may hold you back from admitting that you're struggling, admitting that, you know, it's tough. Yeah. Nearly did a swear then. I stopped myself. So yeah, it's a really rewarding program to be part of, and I'm really seeing the benefit that it's having. Yeah, I hope that Caroline feels that it was something that that helped. You know, it was one of those touch points that helped her whilst she was off.
So that program, actually, you buddy somebody before they go on maternity leave. So from whenever they choose to tell you they're pregnant, they can then get a buddy and have that. Because obviously pregnancy comes with its challenges as well. How did that come about? Did you sort of go to the powers that be at Starcom and say, we're missing this is what we need, and they supported you?
Yeah, they were incredibly supportive. I think there wasn't the budget there to continue the external coaching. You know, that is a costly enterprise. But I realised that so much of what my coach Helen had done for me was really just be there for me, be someone completely impartial that I could talk to, and sort of gently encourage me rather than sort of sitting with anxiety to do something about it. You know, I'm worried that the people in leadership who I've invested in building relationships with, you know, will leave. There's a churn in our industry. What if I come back and nobody is holding my credit, you know, that I've built up over this time? And she helped me realise, okay, well, what stops you reaching out to more people? Why can't you extend that network further? Who is going to say no if you reach out and say, I'm a mum-to-be, this is my role. Are you someone that I can touch base with on my kit days? Are you somebody that I can email? Are you somebody that I can meet for coffee when I'm on my way to coming back? Nobody's going to say no to that. I'm
guessing you found that. I'm guessing you found that there were loads of people totally ready to help and totally, you know, going to answer that call to arms.
Overwhelmingly so, absolutely. And yeah, it makes such a huge difference to the mum in question. You know, what to you is that, you know, a half-hour coffee and a gentle chat really means a lot to them, and I think really makes a really meaningful difference.
I'd like to talk now a little bit about you back in the workplace as established working mums. You've sort of, you know, manoeuvred that transition. You're back there. You're fighting the fight every day, which is fantastic. How has becoming a mum changed you, and how do you think, you know, has it made you stronger? Is every day a battle, or actually do you sort of have a stronger sense of self as a result of it? Claire?
Yes, it changes you, and yes, it makes you better. I think for me, one of the challenges coming back, what I found quite important straight away is I was suddenly leaving this. As much as I wanted to return to work, and I equally liked the fact that I have both to draw from, and that I'm trying to inspire my future children as to what they can achieve. It was quite a challenge for me to think about why I was leaving them, and suddenly the importance of having a bit more purpose with work that wasn't purely driven by salary and progression and title, that perhaps was a bit more of a driving factor before I became a mum. That became a lot more important. So for me, I recognised that quite early on, thankfully, and I got to work with a coach as part of a broader kind of group coaching session on helping really solidify for myself what my new purpose was. And that I will try to verbatim say it. So essentially it was being an inspiring and authentic leader to other women, future parents, and that really on a day-to-day basis, particularly when I'm having a tough day or I'm not being very good at setting my boundaries are incredibly important. I try to remember that, and even doing initiatives like this, sitting on panels, stuff that I just naturally would perhaps shy away from, even in a past life, even pre-kids, it's really helped me to focus in on the fact that it's not just me I'm doing this for. I'm doing this to try and showcase to other women particularly, but anyone that struggles with anxiety, anyone that struggles or has imposter syndrome, has self-doubt, that you can do it. I'm no different from anyone else. In fact, I struggle probably more with anxiety than the normal. And you've got to try and throw yourself out there and show people that they can lean into that. So for me, that's been quite transformational in being able to lean into stuff that would otherwise I'd have been too scared of, including this. If I'm brutally honest, this is a big challenge for me, but
Well, it's
doing
called Brave Stories.
Right.
There's a reason for that, isn't there?
Exactly.
Actually, that brings me on nicely to something that you said, Elspeth, again when we were off camera, which was you said honesty and vulnerability are superpowers. And that really resonated with me because I think that's a real transformation in how we are operating in the world of business now, where some of those barriers can come down, and actually it can be incredibly powerful to do that. How do you sort of fly the flag for that?
Things like this, and just being as open as I can about my experience of motherhood, that similar to these two, it was a fog for me. It took me a really long time, 4 months, to really fall in love with my daughter. So I think the more we talk about it, the more of a difference it makes, that we don't get anywhere, we don't change anything by just pretending we're okay and ploughing on and putting on a brave face. And I realised what power it had for me, the conversations I'd had, with a really senior leader that had shared her story of miscarriage with me through the process of a WACL Talent Award recently, and I spoke about postnatal depression. One of the judges opened up and said that it really resonated with it. It was so, I was like, you're a judge and you're sharing that with me. It was so powerful. And the more we do that, the more we realise that this is everywhere, the more we realise that you can look around and think, oh, she's perfect and everything's easy for her. It's not. Let's be open about the fact that it's not, and then we can start supporting each other and uplifting each other, rather than pretending.
And I think having a supportive business to come back into is absolutely paramount, right? We've talked about being open and honest and how that's so important in the transition back into work, and indeed in coping with any of the anxiety issues that we've talked about. Obviously, you need to have a safe space. You need to have a company in an industry that supports that. Do you think our industry is doing well here? Do you think we are talking about this more? And do you think the support is really, are we walking the walk, or are we just sort of doing the tokenistic sort of initiatives at the moment? How do you think we're doing?
I think in terms of flexible working, I felt very comfortable requesting to be able to work part-time. Quite a lot of people, I think, do it within the company, which is great to see. So it's more about thinking what would work for me, what would I be happy with in terms of my balance, and then I requested it, and there was kind of no issues with it being approved, which was brilliant. And I don't know, I assume that it would be accepted as well, but then I have friends in other industries and then they're not able to work part-time. They've had to go back 5 days a week and they just haven't really had a choice in the matter. So I think we're definitely lucky in that respect.
And I feel that shared parental leave has really taken off in the last couple of years, and I think that's something that more and more people are taking advantage of, which is great. But again, do you think, and I'm asking you to step into the shoes of men for a moment, but do you think men are doing that as much as they would like to, or do you think there is still a stigma attached to men taking time off to be at home looking after their children?
I think it must be incredibly hard. My husband took 3 months shared parental with our second. I think first time round, we both sort of learned a lesson, and we were determined to do it differently second time. So it was only having had that experience that he then realised that that was going to be the right decision for him, the right choice for him. I think it's as much as there's kind of stigma and difficulty around women having these conversations, quadruple it for guys. Who do they talk to? Where are the examples? Who can they reach out to understand what their options are, what the benefits of something like taking an extended period of parental leave?
What is the industry doing at the moment? Is there anything that you can see in the industry or amongst your peers that really gives you hope that we are going in the right direction, but we haven't arrived yet, but we will get there eventually?
So for me, again, I'm going to come back to the sort of day-to-day. For me, it's all about the day-to-day and the everyday people, not just the industry and the bigger initiatives. The bigger initiatives are very important for talking the talk, but walking the talk is the important thing. And so the thing that gives me hope is these two women sat next to me, yourself as well, listening to your story of parenthood and that vulnerability and that realness. Becoming has been transformational, and it's been amazing to see that kind of progress over time. But I think it's in those day-to-day, everybody kind of championing that need is the thing that's going to be the game changer again for us as an industry. And yes, you have to, this kind of thing is amazing to kind of get it out there and make it very transparent and very front and centre in terms of people's minds, but it's those day-to-day, it's beholden to all of us, parents, non-parents, just to really not accept the status quo, to challenge our own biases, because let's face it, we've spoken previously as well, that how often is it quite easy to default into your natural kind of how you grew up, and our reference points from our parents is very different. We've moved dramatically ahead from some of the biases that my previous generations have held, so that's amazing, but we can't stop there. We've got to keep pressing, and I take it as a personal goal of mine as well as a kind of collective industry to get there.
Well, I think you three are probably my beacon of hope in the industry as well, because you're definitely blazing a trail. I think it's so wonderful to see people that have, you know, come back from a really, really difficult, each of you have had very difficult experiences on your maternity leaves, but you've come back stronger and you've come back with a real sense of self, a brand new identity, and you're now blazing the trail for everybody else. So I think that's a really, really great place for us to stop, actually. So thank you so much for joining us today and for being brave enough to share your stories with us. And thank you to everybody for watching.